Welcome, Stellar Seeker. I'm the Astral Arkitekt, and this is the third lesson in Digital Dimensions Theory Creativity Framework for builders like you, experimenting with the use of blockchain data to create truly unique digital constructs. Now, before we dive in, I have a bit of housekeeping to attend to. I created Digital Dimensions Theory to meet my own needs as a creator. My game's multiverse is expansive, and I needed a set of rules and guidance to help other creators help me flesh out my vision. The tools and rule sets I needed were found to be lacking, though. And one thing being early to a space has taught me is that you can stop along the way and roll your own rule sets. If other people like these rule sets, they'll choose to play by them, and a consensus begins to form. And it's important in these early days for us to have options. So today, I'm presenting one to you here. Dive into the description or replies of this video and learn about my alternative to digital matter theory, digital assembly theory. It's inspired by the groundbreaking work of astrobiologist Sarah Walker and Professor Lee Cronin, Regis Professor of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow. And assembly theory teaches us that incredibly complex systems can emerge from very humble, simple beginnings. Now, while my focus will be on teaching through digital assembly theory, everything I teach is still applicable to students of digital matter theory. Let me make that clear. DAT is simply a detailed framework for non-arbitrary procedural generation. It offers a la carte solutions to various challenges in creating complex digital constructs. Okay? So with that out of the way, let's review where we've come from and then dive into where we're going. In lesson 1, we covered the idea discovery by way of revealing our creative sparks, our answers to the question, I wonder what my next thought will be. In lesson 2, we envisioned our desired end result and began to work our way backwards from the finished result to the starting point where the first action needs to be taken. Today, in lesson 3, DAT-2, the plane, we'll continue by further defining our digital constructs using trait expressions, simple arrays of data that the blockchain can assemble your project from. So what do you say we dive in and learn all about DAT-2, the plane? Let's go. In the grand tapestry of the cosmos, there exists an Archon known as the Arbiter of Incarnate Identity. This Archon, revered for their wisdom and meticulous craftsmanship, shapes the archetypes from which all beings are fashioned. Their work lays the foundation upon which the essence of life is built, and their influence stretches across the vast expanse of the material world universe. Imagine the Arbiter of Incarnate Identity at work, selecting traits and weaving them into the fabric of existence. They draw from 10 distinct aspects: whisper, serpent, knight, priest, guardian, prophet, warrior, harbinger, angel, and seraph. Each aspect holds its own unique qualities and potential, waiting to be brought to life. Next, the Arbiter selects the race of each being, choosing from the diverse array of Cosmagi, Primarian, Astrolith, Auroran, Chimera, Skydancers, and Lumens. Each race carries its own history, culture, and attributes, adding another layer of complexity to the creation process. Finally, the Arbiter considers the trinary gender, male, female, and other, adding yet another dimension to the identities they craft. With each selection, they shape the overall appearance and essence of each being, ensuring that every creation is unique and multifaceted. As the Arbiter of Incarnate Identity works, they collaborate closely with Galadriel, the Archon of the In-Between. Galadriel takes these meticulously crafted archetypes and selects the perfect one for each soul's next journey into the land of the living. And together, they create a seamless flow of existence where each being's identity is carefully constructed and woven into the grand design of the universe. Now, When we speak of DAT-2, the plane, this is where I think most of the exciting action occurs. You see, there's this interesting pattern I've noticed when it comes to expressing creativity, and it's this. It's often a matter of recursive actions. You dig yourself deeper and deeper, further and further down into a rabbit hole until you strike some kind of gold for yourself with that specific trait or aspect of your creation. And it's usually that point at which, you've created something multifaceted, unique, and hopefully appealing to the beholder. They go, yes. And so in this allegory, we learn of the arbiter of incarnate identity from my Astral Assemblage Games Multiverse, an Archon fashioning what sounds an awful lot like the beginnings of a profile picture collection, if not the essence of life, right? Why? Well, he's got the genre or aspect, as it's referred to in this allegory, or if you would prefer to think of it as like the zodiac, or the profession, if you want to get a little bit more down to earth about it. It's the way they express themselves through life. And that's the first decision we make, is what kind of fuel does the fire need? And that fire is the fire of existence, right? Like, what sort of experiences does the universe need more of? I'll start there and I'll create with that, is what the arbiter says. And so they choose an archetype or an aspect. And then next, they choose a race. And a race can affect many things, right? But at its top level decision, it's just one of 7 choices in the case of the allegory. But race can affect many things, right? Or you can also think of it as species, since in my multiverse, we're talking intergalactics here. It can affect skin color, hair color, eye color. Do they have skin? Are they made of gas? Are they made of light? Do they use legs? If they do use legs, how many do they typically use? And then there's gender. That's the third trait that the arbiter makes a decision on. And that in this multiverse can be expressed in 3 ways: male, female, or other. And the reason for other is very simple. This is a sci-fi universe that I'm talking about here. And so there's going to be robots and cyborgs and agender or non-binary conforming aliens out there. So other. And with those 3 top-level traits, the level of complexity with which we can visualize an end result is astronomical, just with 3 top-level traits. And that's what DAT-2 is all about, is identifying in your project what the best top-level traits are to help you realize the digital construct you want to create, whether it's a profile picture collection, a video game, card game. In my case, I like to make card games, not necessarily video games, as in there's not a lot of action. But that's what you get with DAT-2, is you start experimenting and selecting different trait sets to use and see how they express themselves across your data set. And that is where we are going to start, is what is DAT-2 specifically? And then, as per our previous 2 lessons, we're going to go through this series of topics. Next, we'll tackle the thought experiment that helps you get in the frame of mind to do the thing, which is the action to take. And then we will define the surrender you must make if you feel stuck. And then we'll cover the last 3 all in one fell swoop, because with this lesson, we have one application, example, and tool that's all the same thing. And it's a lot of fun. I'm pretty excited about it. It's called the Digital Entropy Index, folks. How chaotic and crazy fun does that sound? Hopefully, I don't let you down. Let's move on and talk about what is DAT-2. And we'll start where I like to always start, with a quote. Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. Steve Jobs said that, and I want to call out specifically the opening of that quote. Creativity is just connecting things. When you connect more than two things, you move from a simple line to a plane, creating a more complex structure, right? So in the context of digital dimensions theory, DAT-2, the plane, is about connecting these disparate traits to form a cohesive whole. By experimenting with the Digital Entropy Index tool, you can assign and express traits, rearrange their order, and explore different types of expression against the Merkle root, the DNA of a Bitcoin block in digital assembly theory thinking. More on the tools we'll use later. But right now, what I want to focus in on is that concept that creativity is just connecting things. It's being brave and saying, you know what, I'm going to see what the effect of connecting this to that is. You know, fooling around and finding out, as I like to say, with my big boy words. There's another way to say that that's a little bit more fun. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that creativity can be a simple act of connecting disparate things together. You know, when you want to make a sundae, you need a couple ingredients, right? And that's ice cream, some chocolate syrup, some sprinkles, maybe some fruit bits like banana or strawberry or berries, whatever you like. But you need those ingredients, and then you need to connect them in a way that is palatable and pleasing to the beholder. Whether that's you or someone else is neither here nor there right at this moment. DAT-2 is that process of mapping a plane of existence for your creation to rest upon. Okay, it's laying the foundation, trait by trait, brick by brick, if you want to think of it that way, so that you have a solid foundation upon which to express your desire, which is the thing that you wish to create. So with that in mind, let's take a stretch. Take a deep breath. Let it out. Whew. Relax. And let's engage in the thought experiment to warm our creative brains up. This week, I have one of my favorites for you. Probably the question that leads to the highest excitement I know is this special little bit of chaos. What happens when? Not what happens if, not what happens because, but what happens when? It assumes that something is going to happen, right? That's key ingredient number one. It inspires action because it asks for action. What happens when? And then the rest of that. What happens when this trait is connected in that way? What does that mean? What happens when this trait, let's say in the example of the Arbiter of Incarnate Identity, we're fashioning a being to bring into existence? Well, that first choice is their zodiacal archetype or their aspect in my multiverse. So what happens when that trait, the aspect, gets connected to the first byte pair of the Merkle root? How will it be expressed across multiple blocks? Well, there are 10 choices, so we need a number between 0 and 9, right? And then out of, or 1 and 10, however you want to phrase it, but generally speaking in programming, we use 0 to 9 for 10 choices. And then we would select that choice using the first byte pair of the Merkle root, because in digital assembly theory thinking, we all learn from the same source, the Merkle root, the DNA of a Bitcoin block, if you will. And the reason I think that is very shortly put, that a Merkle root is a hash of all the transactions that occurred in that block. That's the simplest way I can put it. And so it is a compact representation of what that block is. And we're going to disassemble it into byte pairs. There are 32 byte pairs in a single Merkle root. And that's 32 options to select a trait from a list of traits to include in our project, whether that's a profile picture, whether that's a game, an application like Satoshi's Sixth Sense, which we reviewed last week in DAT-1, which was DDT Lesson 2. That's not confusing at all. There's too many acronyms. But I think you take my point, is what happens when I do say that the aspect is what the first byte pair of the Merkle root defines. And then what happens when the race or species is the second trait? And what happens when gender is the third? Does it matter the importance of which these three are defined? Does it make it any more or less interesting? What other traits should I have? And those are the kind of thoughts that you should be engaging in when you mess around with this thought experiment. It's what happens when. And that's one of my favorite questions to get the creative juices flowing, is I take the idea that is sat before me and I just ask myself a simple question. What happens when I work on this today, now? What happens when I work on this right now? What ideas come to mind when you ask that question of yourself? You got to listen, okay? You got to listen, my friend. But when you ask that question, your brain is on the hook to provide answers. If you don't give it the attention it deserves when it attempts to answer you, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So get that notepad, get that pen, close your eyes, visualize, imagine, play, act, or pretend that the thing that you want to create, this digital construct, exists, and it is out there in space before you, floating on the other side of those closed eyelids. And just ask yourself, what happens when I try to bring this into existence? And see what thoughts come. What do you need to define about it? What do you need to expressly say? In other words, what traits do you require? Remember, that was DAT-1. That was the previous lesson. What traits do you require to get there? Those are the steps along the path to the destination, are the different traits you need to get there, okay? Those are the different waypoints on the road to realizing what you want. So once you have that list, all you have to do is express that list. So that's the action part of this lesson. In DAT-2, the plane, the action that we take is we start expressing these traits against the Merkle root as our selector. And we see what happens when we do that, if we like the results. If we don't, we make changes. Oh yeah, we make changes. And that is the other part of this that requires a little bit of your courage. You have to be brave enough to try and find out. And then you have to be brave enough to try again when you don't like the result of a specific aspect of what you've created. You don't have to throw the whole thing out just because one aspect of it didn't come out right. Because if you've done your job well, what you've done is you've said there's a trait for this, there's a trait for that, and there's a trait for that. But there's that trait that just isn't gelling with me. And so you can just change that one attribute of that trait, that one expression, right? Like say you're doing eyeballs, okay? You're doing peepers on a profile picture, and you've got a set of peepers that just doesn't work with any combination other than like one of 10 combinations that act as the base layer. So because of that, you're like, I think I want a different pair of eyes, right? So you change the eyes. You have to be brave enough to make other decisions. But before we get into the meat and potatoes here, and I show you the tool, the application, and the example, I want to talk about what happens when you get stuck, and that is that you must surrender. You must surrender something if you wish to continue creating, okay? And here's what I mean by that. Let's turn this into a mantra if we can. If you're open to that, I want you to think this thought to yourself. And I want you to write it down or commit it to memory in a repeatable fashion. And it is this. When uncertainty enters the forefront of my mind, I recognize that in that moment, I have the ability to choose or to surrender. And I will weigh both as valid paths forward. Now, I wrote that sentence in a very deliberate manner. There's one part of it that is particularly important, which is this. I have the ability to choose or to surrender. Now, it's a little bit like jazz in this sense. It's just as much about what I don't say there as what I do say that I want you to think about. I have the ability to choose or to surrender, not to lie back and take what life gives me. I'm putting you in the active role in your life there with those words, getting you out of the passenger seat into the driver's seat with your foot on the gas pedal, not the brake, because the brake doesn't get you to where you get what you want to make, okay? You have the choice between surrendering and accepting that things are going to play out a given way, or you can choose how things play out. And you will consider both of those as the valid paths forward. Giving up isn't an option. Okay, it's not on the table. Choosing to continue or to surrender and let something else make the decision that gets you to continue forward is what I want you to think about here. So what is that surrender? Well, in DAT-2, we have these traits and we must at some point pick which one goes first. So what you would do is you would just go and get the current block from something like my Explora tool, which will be linked in the description below the video. And you say, okay, bits field, I'm going to modulo you so that you are a value between 0 and the length of my list of traits. So if you have 4 traits, then you're going to modulo 4. Okay? And what that'll do is it'll return a number between 0 and 3, right? And so now you have the ability to select one of the 4 items on your list. So just take the bits field, modulo it against the number of items on your list, and then that's what you experiment with next. So if you get stuck and you don't know how to proceed and move forward, just remember that you have these tools, and more so, you have the choice to use them, but not to give up, not to quit. If you don't feel like making a choice, fine, surrender. Let the blockchain decide for you. That's part of what I think it's there for. You know, like it's there as a decision maker if we want to use it that way. That's another way to look at what Bitcoin gives us. It's not just a place to transact and store our value. It's also a decision maker if you want it to be that way. And digital assembly theory, digital matter theory, non-arbitrary trait selection and expression, whatever you want to call it, is what enables that behavior. Okay, so that's pretty neat, I think. It's a decision maker powered by people, you know, and that's a powerful thing because it gives us the option of choosing surrender and still making forward progress. And that is super powerful. It is a almost soul level learning you get every time you make the choice to just surrender and see what happens when you let quote unquote fate decide what it is you work on next. So let's move on to the application because I got deep in the weeds there. The application this week, the example this week, and the tool this week are all one thing, the Digital Entropy Index. What the heck is that? Well, this is a Digital Entropy Index. You can consider this your digital lab for experimenting with digital assembly theory. This will also apply to creating with digital matter theory as well. Just bear in mind that this is Merkle root centric, and you may be wanting to use the block height or the bits field or something like that. So the logic still applies, just the field we're using might be different from what you had planned, okay? So the way that you use this tool is you just sit down and you start entering in the trait sets that you have in your head for your project. You can use this as a brainstorming tool or just as an experimentation tool. And here is how I like to use it. Using the example of the Archon of Incarnate Identity from before, we'll create the Astral Assemblage Aspects project. Now, this is going to be a profile picture collection that I've made up just for demonstration purposes. It's completely fictional, or is it? I don't know yet, but I am kind of excited at the idea. I'm not going to lie. So the Archon of Incarnate Identity used 3 quote-unquote master traits to determine what an aspect is before passing that aspect off to Galadriel, the Archon of the in-between, to assign that aspect to a soul. So we need aspect itself, which is like the zodiacal sign in our world. And we're going to choose from one of these 4 data types. There's a range, which is a range of numbers, an enum, which is a list, an enumerated list, a Boolean, which is true or false, and then a weighted data set, which is an array that has a specificity as to how often that item in the array occurs. I hope that makes sense. So it's a list that says this list item occurs 70% of the time. This second list option occurs 30%. Okay? It always adds up to 100 though. So what you do is you click Add Trait. I forgot to select my trait type. We're going to select enum because we need a list, and then I'm going to type in this list. And then finally we have serif, and then we scroll down and we click Define Enum Trait. And then as you can see, it gets added and it shows us the corresponding Merkle root pair that it's assigned to. And if we hover over that Merkle root pair, it will highlight the data point that is being used to express that trait. And currently, with a Merkle pair of 2b, we get a serpent expression. If we refresh this Merkle root, we'll get a harbinger next time because the value is b4. Next, the value is b0, which expresses a warrior trait. You see how that works? Awesome. So now we're going to add some more traits. Next, we're going to focus on the race, which is one of 8 options. Originally, in the story at the beginning, it was 7, but things have grown and evolved over time. And so now we have the race, which is another enum. We're going to click Add Trait, and I'm going to define the 8 races. Now, the final one, the new one, is non-biological entity. This is a sci-fi multiverse we're creating. We'll click Define Enum Trait. And as a result of being a sci-fi multiverse, there are going to be robotic, cyborg, and AI entities that are characters in the game. So the whole objective of this is that this index is going to help artists and developers like ourselves understand the depth and richness of our generative art or digital projects, whatever it is we're building. And that'll guide you in refining and enhancing your work to achieve more sophisticated and unique outputs, in my opinion. And here's how. You see at the bottom, we now have a basic entropy index score. Well, we want to get that up to diverse or complex at least. I like to work in the astronomical complexity, but that's just me. So we're going to add some more traits. Next, we'll add the gender as discussed before. And gender is pretty simple. It's an enumerated list with 3 options, right? You have male, you have female, and you have other. We click define, and now we're diverse. We've got an entropy index of 2.38. And what that means, what that's calculating, is the number of possible expressions that can be uniquely made. Here with 3 data sets with a total of 21 possible possible options. Amongst those 3 traits, you have 21 possible expressions. It's calculating the overall output to be diverse, not super complex, but diverse. And now we're going to add some more traits. One thing I thought of is what in this could I use to demonstrate range? And so I thought the pinnacle age. In numerology, you have what's known as pinnacles. And in my universe, that's no different. So what we're going to do is pinnacles are important periods. It's when things come to a climax in your life. So we're going to say between the ages of 13 and 100, because this is a sci-fi universe and people can live longer. Maybe the climactic moment occurs later in life. And later in life in a sci-fi multiverse, that probably means around 100 years, let's say, for human-like entities. So now what we have is a pinnacle age that is somewhere between the age of 13 and the age of 100, okay? Now what we're going to do is add one more trait called zoetropic affinity. And that is going to be weighted, okay? And I'll show you how this field works. So the way a weighted works is you have your options, like we'll have novice being the most common, occurring 70% of the time. Then we'll have intermediate, which occurs 20% of the time. Then we'll do adept, which occurs 7% of the time. Then we have master, which occurs 1% of the time, or 2% of the time, rather. And then we have enlightened, which occurs 1% of the time. And 7 plus 2 plus 1 is 10, plus 20 is 30, 30 plus 70 is 100. So we're good to go, and we can click define weighted trait. And as you can see, when we refresh the Merkle root here, we get different expressions with each rotation, with each new Merkle root that we get. That's a good thing. And if we rotated enough, we'd eventually come across like that master or that enlightened ranking. But it's going to be pretty rare. So with that, we're going to add one more field. And first we're going to do it as a Boolean, and we're going to call it gnosis. Whether or not the person has realized that the universe they exist in is not the place they should be calling home. That's what gnosis represents in my multiverse at its most basic level. And as you can see, this person has not achieved gnosis. This aspect has not. But if we refresh enough times, someone will have achieved gnosis here, right? And so that's one way to do it, but that's 50-50, okay? What if the likelihood of achieving gnosis is actually far more rare? So we're going to delete that trait, and we're going to redefine gnosis as a weighted trait, okay? And then we're going to say true 1% of the time. And then we're going to add a second option, which is false. They have not discovered gnosis. And that is 99% of the time. And then we're going to define that trait. And then when we refresh, most of the time that gnosis is going to be false. But eventually, 1% of the time, it's going to be true. So this is how you use the tool. This is how I like to use it. You can shuffle items around. Like let's say that gnosis is actually the most important to us. So we'll define it as the first trait. So now F2 is the result of how gnosis is expressed. Whereas before it was 3-5. which is actually 53, which is interesting because that's a palindrome of 35. That's neither here nor there. But you can save your files. So when you click save, that means you can send that file to someone else. They can come to the DEI and they can modify this, and then they can save their file and send it back to you. It's imperfect, but it works. And you can reset the form and then start from scratch on something else. And then whenever you want to load your file, you just drag it onto the browser viewport and drop it. And then there is your Digital Entropy Index. I hope that was helpful. I hope that you enjoy using this tool. I enjoy using it just from a brainstorming perspective. And yeah, let me know in the comments, in the replies, what your thoughts are. And don't forget to check out the Digital Entropy Index at digitaldimensionstheory.tech/tools/DEI. So there you have it. That is Digital Assembly Theory 2, the plane, all wrapped up and ready for you to run with. This is Digital Dimensions Theory, a creativity framework to get you building on the Bitcoin blockchain, hopefully, but if not, wherever you like, using or not the various tools, mental trickery, and tap dancing I've taught you to move forward and create using non-arbitrary procedural generation. I'm the Astral Arkitekt. Do give us a follow on X at DDTEco or at Astral Arkitekt. And that architect is spelled with K's instead of CH's. So I hope to hear from you. If you enjoyed the course, drop into those comments, hit up my X accounts, replies, do what you like. I don't know your life, but whatever you do, always be building. I hope to see you in the next video.